look at the forward-looking is projecting, and then we look backward at accounting. And there's other things that accountants do that are very important, but what they do on an annual basis is create financial statements that look back and say, okay, what was going on in the business? And part of that is a statement of cash flows, where you might look at money that came in and money that went out, which would be similar to your budget. And so just to throw it out there for another question, why do you guys think that it would be important to look at last year when it's already over? And this could be for your own finances, or it could be more generally.
Can I say?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
jump
like
in.
I have like a part-time job, right? And they have the pay stubs, so it's like good to look back on like how much money you had made and what you spent and what you didn't spend and what you were able to save, couldn't save. Like that could be to go back and looking at last year, even though it's over.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what would you do that information,
I
for
um
example?
I, I'd like change the way I'm spending because if I see like a lot is going out and like on things that I don't need, like I'm overspending on like indulgences, I would probably tone it down a little.
Yeah, you try anyway. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And Zenith is saying too to see your spending habits, and I think that's very much the same thing. So, it's just like learning any history, I guess, is there are these lessons from the past that we need to incorporate if we want to grow, right? And so that was very an excellent point there. So we'll keep charging on. And so session one recap again, changing the way we think about budgeting to thinking about things like building projections and doing this diagnostic accounting. That's how business owners think about their businesses. And so what you want to be doing with your own finances is considering them in those terms and thinking about them seriously and actually making sure you go through the exercises the way that business owners have to. Like if you've got a corporation, you have to produce financial statements every year. It's a discipline, right? And so again, if you think a bit more seriously about your finances that way, then that will set you up for future success. And then this is the other one that I wanted to talk about. It's a little more, a little further off of what we've had in conversation so far, but there's a concept called mental accounting or siloing. Um, and so we're going to start with an analogy. It's a farming analogy. So imagine you are the farmer and you have two silos that contain identical silage. That's the word of the day, silage. And one of your cows is labeled, or one of your silos rather, is labeled sheep, and the other is labeled cows. And there was a really solid plan in place to feed your sheep and your cows through the winter because silage is actually it's basically a preserving process for food. And so, unfortunately, 2020 happened, and half your herd gets wiped out by the cow COVID. And at the same time, your sheep have been busy, and you have more sheep than you had originally planned on. So if you stick to your original plan, you'll have to. I can't even read this way. You'll have excess food for the cows and a deficiency for the sheep. But you're a smart cookie, so you're going to take the extra cow food and you're going to use it to take care of your sheep, and everybody's happy except for the COVID cows. Sad face. And so mental accounting is labeling those silos. And so what is this analogy trying to teach us? Is that a lot of people benefit from creating and maintaining strict structures in their lives. These are good things about building good structures, but it can, in this case, it could be a good habit if you wanted to be really good at basketball, just like dedicate an hour every single day, no matter what, right? But sometimes too much structure can work against you, and managing your budget is one of those kinds of exercises where you can go overboard with the structure. So it's great to get a goal and stick to it, but sometimes, as you pointed out in the previous conversation, with those contingencies that could happen, we have to adjust to unforeseen events. And so, an example that might be in your own life. So you set up a budget that you allocate $100 a month to take in the subway, so you get to work. And your boss actually is like, "Hey, we got a bunch of extra shifts, and you can make more money, so that's great." And you've also been doing a great job at managing those indulgences. So your weekday Slurpees, you've kind of dialed those back a bit. You're worried about early onset diabetes or something. So you got a little extra room in your budget that way. And so mental siloing would be saying, I set up $100 for this, and it has to be $100 for this, and we can't reallocate one way or the other. This is my subway money, right? And it's gone now, so I can't, make an adjustment of some kind. People really do this. So, I work with a lot of people and help them to again manage their finances, and this is a very common thing that people will do. I mean, the subway example is kind of silly because obviously, business owners, they understand when they can play around, but it's obvious that most people would be able to play around with their budget so they can figure out how to have a little more cash for that. So it's pretty obvious that we could just, you know, pay the extra money for the subway because you're going to earn more income. So that's a no-brainer, but it would be an adjustment that you would make because you're not stuck in a structure that's too rigid. And then you could also, well, you're actually forced to consider what you're going to do with your surplus because it's money that's going to be sitting around and not allocated. So, it precludes mental accounting because you're like, well, I have to do something with it. So what's it going to be? And you have to come up with a new plan, right? So it's being agile. And so we should all try to think about our finances the way that business owners think about their business affairs, which means, try to change your activities and the way that you view them so that you can run your business for increased profit. And Danny is going to send out a link because I have an article on our corporate website that it's our blog. And so the article that is this presentation is based on goes into a little more depth. It's not geared necessarily for students specifically, it's geared for adults, but it does bring up a few more examples of ways that you can change your thinking to think more like a business owner. So, and that's my bet. So I think we're going to jump into a quick Q&A before we transition over to IO, right?
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.
Great.
Let me turn my camera on. If there are any questions, please send them along into the chat. Regards to this presentation. If you guys need a moment, though, just so that we don't have too much of a lull, we'll go ahead and get into IO's presentation, and then we can do both right at the end. But if you have any questions, definitely send them directly to me in the chat, and I can go ahead and volley them over to Nate.
I had one.
Go ahead.
It's someone, it was pointed out to me, but I'm actually kind of curious myself because I think I'm guilty of mental soiling. So if you could list like some examples, like off the top of your head, how one would like go about changing that mentality or like stepping in the right direction towards changing that mentality, could you like share them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for being open about your own experience because again, it's so common. And yeah, some things I try to coach people on is to think about your money in a more general sense, right? And I'd say the most common time people are doing this, it's less than budgeting. It's more to do with when you've got certain piles of money that are kind of sitting there, like, okay, this is my fund because I'm going to go on this trip, or this is my fund because I want to buy a car or something like that. That's the more common situation where I see this. And I'll give you an example and how I've tried to change it with a particular person. So I've got clients and they're business owners and they do very well. They've always got tons of money lying around, but it's a couple. The wife is always doing this, constantly doing this. And so one example of what she was doing was there was a business incentive that the government put out during COVID where you could have access to $30,000, well, $40,000 of loan. And if you repay it in 2 years, then $30,000 is all you have to pay back. You actually get to keep 10 as just profit, like it's just in your pocket. And so this lady had done the math and she's like, okay, I have this extra money I want to tuck away. I'm going to tuck away all of it, but it all needs to be there in 2 years' time exactly for this purpose. And I'm just laughing to myself because they're always sitting on piles of cash in the business, right? So I know when we get there, it's going to be no problem. And so I have to try and steer her thinking to say, okay, well, what if we were to do something else with this money and think longer term? Would we be able to make different decisions about how to invest it, right? And so for her, what I tried to do is help her to think about that 2-year mark out and think about different ways that we could get to the same point. So in that case, like what level of confidence do we have that if we were to take a lot of risk with the investments to position them for long term, and if we lost half the money in 2 years, what other options would we have to pay that back? And so we reviewed those options and we were able to reallocate the money so that in the long run, she'll have more from her investments than she would have otherwise if she needed something that was very low risk, because low risk investments pay you almost nothing right now. And so that was a conversation that we had that helped her to change her thinking. So I suppose the lesson from there would be to think more broadly about your money and say, okay, I've got a generic set of resources here. And that was another one we're going to talk more about this at a future psychology of success segment, which is going to have to do with what are financial resources. And you have three key financial resources. There's a little more to it than that, but your three key financial resources are money that you got already saved, your net monthly income, so that's whatever you're earning minus whatever you're spending, and then your third is your ability to borrow. And so if you looked forward to a year from now and you said, okay, where am I going to be in that year's time? And with all these resources, how might I best accomplish all my goals? And then I think looking at your whole picture more broadly and not chopping things up to microscopic levels helps, in my experience, people to kind of break that habit. And it's not a bad thing to have those categories. It's just that they can get overly rigid. And so another thing people will do is they'll put cash in envelopes. This is an old school way of budgeting. Is you take out cash from the bank when your paycheck comes in, and you have envelopes with labels on them, and you put the cash in. And some people who have spending problems, it's a useful tool. But for most people, I find that you're going to have cash that just sort of builds up there. And so you're like, okay, well, what do I do now, right? So you think about that exercise. Like, okay, what would I do now if I had extra resources? And then think about how you can reallocate them. So I don't know if that's the best answer, but it is a real scenario that happened and where we were confronting this problem and where we were able to develop a solution.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you so much for that insight. And thank you for the question as well. Next, we're going to go ahead and pass this over to Io so he can get started. And if you do have further questions for Nate, hold it until the end, and we'll see if we have enough time. I want to make sure we stick to the time as best as possible. And also, in terms of the links, I'll be sure to include those links in the chat by the end of the session, so you guys can take a look at that, and I'll follow up with an email as well. So look out for that as well. Io, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. And you should be able to present. Hold on one moment. Okay, you're good to go.
Hey, are you seeing my screen at all?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's enjoying the good weather. Intercepted by the rain today. So I'm Io. I've worked with Henry and Nate for a little while now. I'm really excited to be here with everybody. And just building on what Nate was talking about, I'm just going to give a few practical insights into the banking system here in Canada, some of the things to look out for, some of the opportunities, and basically why should you care and why is it important? Opening a bank account, or maybe even taking the next step and taking control of your bank account, perhaps after your parents opened one for you, is one of the most important steps to successfully integrate into early adult life. You probably need a personal account in order to receive your salary, maybe even to rent or buy an accommodation, to pay for your TTC card or your transport fare, to pay for gas, electricity, get a phone line. All kinds of practical parts of life require interacting with the banking system. So it's really important that we understand some of the key terminology and some of the key kind of best tips and pitfalls as well. Over the course of this series, over the next few months, we're going to be aiming to set you up with how things work in general in financial services, including investing, making money from your money, setting up a business, buying a house or buying a condo. But all of these things, which I see as kind of next level, they all start from the very basics, the very bread and butter of having a bank account. So for some people, a lot of this may seem repetitive, but it's really important that we start from the basics and have a solid foundation within which to build on. So why do we even bother with bank accounts? So here's some of the most obvious reasons here. To keep money in a secure place. So Nate used the example of some people actually keeping money in an envelope. We don't need to do that, obviously. To be able to earn interest on your money is very important. To avoid needing to carry large amounts of cash, so obviously it's a lot more practical. To be able to buy products on the internet, and to be able to use cash machines to withdraw money. So some of us have probably heard of the terms of checking accounts and saving accounts. These are two broad definitions of two different types of accounts. Within each of them, there's a lot of variation. But for today, we'll just keep it quite simple. And we'll go through what each of these typically tends to be the differentiators between these two. So just looking at the left-hand side, that's going through the checking account. So what is a checking account really for? A checking account is for use now. It's for use today, for use for your everyday transactions, for buying a TTC card, going to buy a magazine, going to buy a newspaper, topping up your phone. Typically, there's a fee, and we're going to go into that in a little bit. So typically, you will pay the bank with which you have your checking account a monthly fee. There are some exceptions, and we can go into some of those as well. A checking account usually doesn't pay you much interest. You can normally use a checking account as many times as you like within a month. And again, we'll go into this a little bit more in detail later, but sometimes you may get charged for the more you use it. And with a checking account, there's often always the option of having a debit card, direct deposit, overdraft protection, meaning you're allowed to kind of have a balance which goes into negative territory. That's also an option with a checking account, as well as using it in a branch or an ATM, so going to one of the bank branches rather. So that contrasts with a savings account, which is almost the exact opposite of those. So a savings account is more an account for later. It's more an account for a rainy day. It's more an account for saving up for an education, saving up for wanting to buy a new computer next year, saving up for the vacation you're taking at Christmas. So think of savings as more for medium-term expenses. The fees typically tend to be a little bit lower than on checking accounts. They typically offer some level of interest. Normally, there's a limited number of transactions, and they also do have some other features as well, which we don't really necessarily have time to go into here. But generally, think of a savings account as you putting money aside and preparing for a rainy day and big ticket expenditures, and checking account for your day-to-day things, such as taking money out and paying money in, such as your salary. So we know the difference between a checking and a savings account. The key question now is what kind of things do we look for? Because even within the same bank, there could be 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6, 7, or 8 different types of options of checking accounts and savings accounts. And that's within the same bank. So what kind of things do we typically look for? Do you want an account for everyday use or to save? Is a good question to ask first. Do you want a basic card or a debit card? And basically, a debit card will allow you a little bit more flexibility in transactions, such as using them online. How much can you withdraw each day? If you're somebody that needs to have daily expenses and your daily withdrawal limit is $50 on an account or $25 on an account, will that be sufficient for you or not? So these are the kind of questions which you'll need to ask yourself before you sign up for one. Can you arrange an overdraft? So again, that gives you a little bit of flexibility for your account to go into negative territory. It's an option to have. Often there's a fee for doing that. So one should weigh up the pros and cons according to your own situation. Fees are very important. Fees on a checking account can sometimes be as low as $5. And that seems pretty low, but I look at that as being, well, $5 a month doesn't sound like too much, but over a year, that could be more than $60. So it's really important when you're looking at a checking account, have a look out there, see what other accounts are available, and make sure that you're comfortable with the amount of fees that you're paying rather. Can you set up direct payments? How easy is it to manage your account online? I'm somebody who's always using my phone. I'm very comfortable with my bank in terms of how it works online, but I wasn't previously. And the previous bank I was with, for me, it was a nightmare using it online. And although that may sound trivial, sometimes that can be important in terms of perhaps missing something which you would have already been known, which you would have ordinarily known about. Is there a buffer if you're slightly overdrawn? Some banks can be pretty, can penalize you pretty strongly if you go above your overdraft limit. It's a good thing to know what will happen if you do go overdrawn and if you go beyond the overdraft limit, just so you're aware of any potential negative outcomes. Here's a big one. Is there an opening gift when you open the account? Oftentimes, to get your business, some of the banks, and most of them do it, they will give you a gift, and that might range from a gift voucher to a pair of headphones to movie tickets. It's worth looking at. All of these questions, which hopefully we're all asking ourselves before we open a bank account, should really be taken in their totality. So don't be induced just by a sweet gift, which a bank is offering you, if the fees are very high. Is my screen still being shown?
No, it's not being shown right now.
Okay, let's get this back on.
There you go.
Back on? Perfect. And for a savings account, how much interest can you earn? It's a very important question, particularly for savings, because you're putting your money with a bank, and you're putting away money which could have been spent today. So typically a bank will pay you interest, and it's really important to know how much interest you can earn, just so you can make sure you're choosing the right savings account for you. So, having said all that, here's a pop quiz. So just to catch everybody unawares. So here's 4 accounts, and I've randomly picked on the Royal Bank of Canada. And here are 4 checking accounts which RBC provide within their bank, so to their clients. So the first one is called day-to-day banking with a $4 fee. The second one is called Advantage Banking with a $12 fee, and these are per month. The next one is Signature No Limit Banking with a $16 fee, VIP Banking with a $30 fee. So I'm not going to call anybody out, but just think to yourself, which of these would you, in your current situation in life, which of these accounts appeal to you the most? Just to add, if anybody's an iPhone user like myself, the 3 accounts to the right each offer a free pair of AirPods as well, so that might sweeten the deal. Okay, so somebody said Advantage Banking. Yeah, just give a few seconds for people just to think. Okay, so the actual answer is everybody's correct, because the answer is it depends. So with any account, we always have to look deeper into the, if you will, just the headline statements and numbers which are offered. So just looking at these 4 again. So I apologize if the text here is a little bit small. So here's some more information which RBC provide about each of these accounts, which are not easily visible until you go to the compare option on their website. So that first account, which is $4, seemed pretty good to me. $4 a month, $48 a year. It seems pretty good. But then I'm looking at, so this is in the first column. That's that first account, which is in the first column. Every time I use a non-RBC branch, I will be charged $2. So if I think where I live, there's not an RBC branch anywhere near where I live. So if I'm using another bank to withdraw money, those fees can add up to the extent that they could actually be more than the monthly fee. So these are the kind of things which we also need to think about. Whereas on the second account, there's no fee for using non-RBC branches. Another thing which I wanted to bring to your attention again with the $4 account is if you're somebody that uses checks. I'm from a generation where checks were everything, but it seems to be less popular nowadays, but sometimes we do need them. A fee will be applied for each check which I write. Whereas for some of the other accounts, it's not necessarily the case, that they're free. On the flip side, $30 a month for the all-inclusive account. I get a lot of benefits, but it's a lot of money which I'm paying. That's almost $360 over a year. So I say all of this just to encourage everybody, just to, when you're looking at a checking account, and this is whether you don't have one at the moment, or this is whether you have one and you want to shop around, make sure whichever way you're doing it, do a compare and contrast of the different accounts. Make sure you're looking out for the fees, make sure you're looking out for the features, make sure you're looking out for the flexibility in terms of will you be charged per transaction, and will you be charged if you're using ATMs from a different bank. So another pop quiz. Can anybody spot the difference between these 2 cards? And again, I'm not going to call anybody out, so just have a little think about it yourself. So these are just 2 cards, both for a checking account. So I'll give you some clues here. Both offered by the same bank, BMO, so no difference here. And I'll make it a little bit easier. And I will tell you that the fees for each of these accounts are exactly the same.
Jasmine said one is debit with tap, and Earl said it's a personal card versus a business card.
Okay. So the first answer was from who did you say?
Jasmine.
From Jasmine. Okay. I like Jasmine's answer. The second answer could be correct as well, and it is correct as well. But let's go with the first one. So debit with tap versus non-tap. So what is the difference here? This is the difference here that a debit card, which is provided by a bank, the one on the left-hand side allows you to use it for point-of-sale transactions. So it becomes a debit card in effect. So you can use this for purchasing goods or services at various merchants. You can use this online, and you can also use it to make payments for things which you're buying remotely as well. So this one, as Jasmine correctly said, you can use a tap, and it gives you a lot more flexibility, and particularly when you don't have cash and you're at a place where they do not accept cash. This gives you a little bit more flexibility. So again, these are some of the things just to think about when you're opening an account as well. So we've talked very briefly about saving accounts as well. And I'm sure all of us have heard about credit cards. And we've probably heard a number of things about them, ranging from, I can't wait to get my first credit card, all the way to the other end to, probably from our parents, don't you ever get a credit card because they're bad. Which one of those is correct? Again, it's neither. The correct answer is typically somewhere in the middle. So here's a few features. And I'd encourage everybody, and then this is the third and final pop quiz which I will give. How many of these do you think apply to a credit card? So a convenient way to pay. Is that true of a credit card or not? Is it free money? Is it a debit card? Is it an ATM card? Is it a way to build your credit score? Is a credit card effectively a loan? Is it unlimited money? Or is it more secure than cash? So I'll give you a clue. 3 of these will be correct, and 5 of these will be incorrect. Okay, so I'm going to give the answers in a moment. I'm going to check. See, Earl's put some answers in. Okay, thank you, Earl. I'm hoping that we've got some great students in here that get 8 out of 8 correct. So, convenient way to pay. It is a convenient way to pay. Many places will not provide, many places where we want to buy things may not allow us to use cash to pay, so credit card can be convenient. It's not free money. So the money that we do use on a credit card does need to be repaid. It's not a debit card. A debit card uses the money that you deposited into your account, whereas a credit card allows you, it's effectively borrowed money, which allows you to use money which isn't there yet. It needs to be repaid. It's different to an ATM card, which again is used for your checking account. Is it a way to build your credit score? Absolutely. I'm going to pause here and just go back to something which Nate mentioned. Everybody has 3 potential sources. One is your time, one is your money at hand, cash at hand, which you have available, and that may be in your debit or savings accounts, as we spoke to earlier. And the third one is your ability to borrow. Credit cards are a potential ability to borrow because it effectively is similar to borrowing. But a good use of your first credit card, particularly at your stages of life, could be a way, if done properly, to build up your credit score. And as we go through these series of events, we'll get more into the importance of having and maintaining a strong credit score. Is it a loan? It's not a loan. A loan has particular repayment terms to it. It's definitely not unlimited money, although I wish it was. And is it more secure than cash? Absolutely. So again, just think of a couple of scenarios. For example, if you're on vacation or if you're going to an event where there's a lot of people, having things on a credit card, particularly with the insurance that it provides, can make it more secure than carrying around a load of cash. Always check your statements. So for credit cards and for your debit account, your checking account, it's very, very important to make sure that you always check your statements. I'll go back to something which Nate mentioned about businesses and taking care of your personal finances like they are a business. So both Henry, who is the president of Nexim, and myself have worked as accountants. And the funny thing is that the principles which Nate has spoken to you about are the same principles which these multinational companies all employ people like Henry and myself to do those same things. So the principles which we learn at these early stages of our life, they actually carry on all the way up the corporate ladder. And one of those things is making sure you know what you're, making sure you're checking your transactions, making sure that you know what's in your account, making sure that you know what your expenditures are, and making sure you know what your incomings are as well. And we went over some of these in the budgeting section from last week, but I strongly encourage everybody, when you have your checking account, when you have your savings account, when you have your credit account, checking your statements is very, very important. Is it because the banks might make an error? Potentially, although it's very rare. I'll give you a real example, actually, of why I always check mine. And this might be something which everybody can relate to. So I'm big on Netflix. I have a Netflix subscription, and money comes out of my account automatically every month. I also signed up for another service, which is a competitor to Netflix, and I wasn't aware that after my initial trial, it would be charged on my account. Now, I'd cancelled it, but it was still being charged. Now, I hadn't checked my account for 2 months, 3 months. I hadn't even noticed it. The fourth month, I wondered, what is this charge going on here? And by that point, it was very, very difficult for the bank to kind of reimburse me for the 3 months, which they'd already charged me, because I hadn't been checking my account statements. So sometimes we sign up for things. Sometimes there are things which come into our account which shouldn't necessarily be there. So that's one practical reason why we should always check our accounts and make sure that we're, again, treating our bank accounts, treating our personal finances like our own personal mini business, if you will. And last but not least, a very brief overview of loans. So we've talked so far about checking accounts and saving accounts. Then we've talked about credit cards. Okay, so credit cards, as we mentioned, is a kind of form of borrowing. If you wish to apply for a credit card, you can do so at most banks, either online or in person. You get billed every month, but a loan is a direct, it's a fixed amount which a bank has, if you will, advanced to you for a particular purpose which you want to take that loan out for. So a few features of a loan will be, when you take it out, you have to pay back the amount borrowed plus interest. So the amount will be paid back and there will be an interest charge on that loan. To get a loan, you have to qualify for the loan. So this goes back to what we were talking about before. With a credit card, getting a credit card at this stage and making sure that it's well managed, well controlled, could be a good way of building up a credit score. And a credit score gives a possibility further down the line to get a loan if you need a loan for a particular purpose. With loans, as well as with credit cards, do your best to minimize the costs and run the numbers to understand before you borrow. Most people will find that banks at some stage in your life will be falling over themselves to lend you money. The fact that you're being offered something doesn't always mean that one should take it. The fact that somebody's offering more money than we need doesn't necessarily mean we should take more money than we need. So it's always best to, again, going back to running this as your personal business, look at your own situation, see how much you actually need if you do come down to taking a loan, and making sure that you have a repayment schedule in your mind, which is realistic as to how you can pay back that money. The fourth point here is the monthly payment. So each time you pay back your loan every month, a part of that will be paying down what we call the principal, which is the amount which you've borrowed. So if you've borrowed $5,000, a part of your monthly repayment will go to reducing that balance of $5,000 every month or with each payment. But another portion of it will be actual interest payments. Think of interest payments as the profit that the lender, in this case the bank, is making by giving you that money. The higher the amount of interest, typically the worse it is, and the lower the amount of interest. When you're going out for get a loan or a credit card, you're looking for the lowest rate possible typically. And finally, as I mentioned, strong credit helps your chance of getting a loan. I'm going to expand on this point a little bit. Strong credit is very, very important, and we will go through into some tips as to how to build your credit score up in future sessions. But a good credit score is not only good in terms of helping you to get approved rather than being rejected for a loan, but also the terms of the loan are very important as well. Getting a loan at an interest rate of 6% versus an interest rate at 4% can make a huge difference in terms of how much you're paying back every month. And having a higher credit score helps you to go down and get a lower rate of interest. So it means essentially what you're paying back every month is less than it would have been if you didn't have such a good credit score. So in terms of personal financing, there's so much that we can go through here. I had a trouble kind of trimming this down to give you enough in bite-sized information, but there are a number of resources which Danny has been kind enough to share on the drive. I encourage everybody to go and look at those resources. Here's a few articles for people that want to find out a little bit more. I definitely encourage you to read this one in the middle, Banking Services, and it gives a really good and deeper overview than I could have provided in terms of how loans work, how credit cards work, and what to look out for in checking accounts and how to interact with the banking system. So hopefully you got something from this, and I will hand it back to you, Danny.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Io. If there are any questions before we wrap up, please put them in the chat or send them to me, send them my way. If you have any questions for Nate as well, while Nate is here, feel free to ask now as well. Again, I want to thank Nate for presenting the first segment. I hope a lot of people were moved and inspired by that, got some inspiration for planning and the whole psychology of it. And Io, thank you again for presenting about how banks and loans work. And any of the resources that these gentlemen shared, you will get them in an email. We have a Google Drive resource link that is specific to everyone here who attends. So we can send that out, and you guys can have access to any of the documents or any articles. Let me check to see if we have any questions in here. Okay, we don't have any questions at the moment, and I don't want us to get cut off. So I think we're just going to go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all for joining us.
We have one from Jasmine. Actually.
Oh, we do, Jasmine.
Oh, she'll send it later.
She said she'll send later. Okay, that's great.
Okay, cool.
Whatever works.
And you can, if you have the question, if anyone has a question you want to just speak up to, just raise your hand. You can go ahead.
Oh, okay. So regarding credit cards, I understand that if they it's best not to pay the item that you purchase on your card to pay it right away, right? You should let it hit your statement, and that helps with building credit, right? It helps your score because then it hits the account, your credit card statement account, and then the goal is to pay it after the fact. So to show, is that correct? Or is it okay, okay, I just bought it today and I'm going to pay it as soon as I leave the store. I'm just going to transfer the money from my account.
It's a really good question you asked, Jasmine. Thank you so much for that. It's yes and no. If you speak to somebody such as somebody who's a lot more conservative, they will say exactly what you said, pay it off straight away. A rule of thumb, and again, it's different. And again, credit cards, first thing I want to say is that credit cards can be a powerful thing or a dangerous thing, depending on how you use it. So I'll give you an illustration, Jasmine. Hopefully this answers. If I was given a credit card for $1,000 and I wanted to build up my credit limit, build up my credit score, doing which you said not to do is absolutely right. So if I went out and I bought I don't know, I bought a new phone for $500 on Monday, and I paid it off on Tuesday, and at the end of the month, my credit card statement balance is zero. That might not do much for my credit score. Typically, you're advised that your credit balance should be no more than 25 to 30% of what your credit limit is. So if you're given a $1,000 limit, typically the best practice is not to go above $300. Maintaining a balance at the end of the month is a good thing to show that you're using the account. So having a credit card by itself isn't going to do too much in terms of helping your credit score if you're not using it. It can be good to maintain a minimal balance at the end of each month, but to pay it off before interest actually occurs. So that's where I'd say is the
Yeah,
for
I guess
most people, that would be the ideal target, to make sure you're not paying the interest, but having a balance which you're paying off. And don't allow that balance to go above 30% at the end of each month. Once you're getting 50, 60, 70%, that could potentially be detrimental to your credit score as well. Hope that kind of helps.
right. Yeah, it does. It does. I'm trying to figure out exactly like what it means to to understand when that interest hits
Yeah.
and to get it somewhere before that hits.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the schedule of you'll have a cycle of billing, right? And
Yeah.
so, it'll be the 15th to the 14th or something. Pick your days. And then once that statement comes out on the 14th, then you have a window of usually, a number of weeks where there's no interest that's billed and you can make your payment anytime before the deadline. So that's how functionally you can approach it. And I would recommend that for a few reasons, because you should be thinking about your affairs like a business person. Your time is valuable, right? And so if you're hopping on your banking and paying each individual bill as it comes, or each individual item, that's a lot of hassle. So I'm very much pro, reducing the amount of overhead and administration. So definitely that's an argument. I can't say I'm an expert in how credit scores are calculated exactly, but I do think you'd be fine either way in terms of that dimension. But I did want to pose a question to Io just quickly, which is to say, what are other? I mean, we're going to have to do a session that's really in depth on credit scores in terms of how to grow that figure. But I would just say, in case anyone's like completely unaware of how that, like, what is a credit score? You've got a range of numbers. I think between 300 and 900 in Canada, and you get a score, just like, I don't know, you get a score on a test, right? And it's based on a number of variables, but the two most important things are how much debt you're carrying in relation to your income and how you do with your bill payments. And so this is why, getting a credit card, paying it off, that's the single largest component of your credit score. There are other factors, but Io, what would be the examples, other examples beyond just applying for a loan that would be relevant to having a good credit score?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nate. And the first thing I would say before I actually answer that is, I know we may all be at different levels of knowledge here. The first thing I'd encourage everybody to do, if you're thinking of potentially any way down the line of buying a house or getting a car which you want to finance, it's important to track what your credit score is. And again, just think of what Nate said, between 300 and 900, the higher the better. Often you have to pay. Creditkarma.ca. So credit, Karma.ca. Make sure you visit that website, set up an account there, and you can actually check your credit score for free. So it's a really good resource. One thing I should have mentioned, you don't have a credit score. You normally have a number of credit scores, depending on who's giving it to you. So creditkarma.ca is one version of your credit score, but it's typically very representative of what your credit actually is. So a few things that could be bad for your credit could be late payments. So let's say you take out a phone with Rogers, right? Paying $100. We went through some of this in the budgeting session last month. Let's say you're a couple of months late on paying your statement. That could be negative for your credit score. Normally, Rogers, Bell, TELUS, they'll give you a little bit of grace period, maybe a month. But let's say you're paying regularly your bills a month or 2 months late, that's not going to be good for your credit score. If you have something like that which escalates, so maybe a bankruptcy, or it goes to collection. So, for example, let's say you've taken out a loan and you've not been able to pay it back. That company, what they typically do is they say, okay, we don't want to be chasing up Nate. Let's send it to another company to go and chase him up, which is called collections. that can have a negative effect on your credit score, and it will actually be listed on your credit score. So when you go out to get a phone from TELUS, or you want to go and get a credit card from somebody else, that can have a detrimental effect on your score. Some of the things which could have a positive effect, again, is managing your finances. Having a credit card is very important. Credit card, let's say you've got it's best to have, I always believe the first credit card you get, it's always a good idea, if possible, to maintain that credit card. Because one of the things which goes into calculating your credit score is the longevity of your credit, something which we call the average vintage of your credit. So for example, if Nate's a lot younger than I am, but let's just imagine that we're the same age. If I have a credit card and mine was set up a year ago and Nate was set up 10 years ago, and we both manage our finances exactly the same way, the only difference is when we got our credit cards, Nate will probably have a better credit score than I do. So the first credit card I got when I was in Canada, when I came to Canada, was 12 years ago, and I still have that credit card to this day. And going back to Jasmine's point, I use it now and again just to make sure there's a balance at the end of each month, just to show that it's being used. But the fact that it's been around for 12 years in my name has a positive influence on my credit score as well. So those are some of the kind of things which can also affect your overall credit score as well. And again, the importance of a credit score, I really want to emphasize, it's not a, it's not just for a badge of honor. It's not just to say, hey, I've got a higher credit score than I had last month. As you interact with the financial system, a good credit score is really essential, basically in keeping your costs down. So whether you want to go and finance a car, whether you want to get a credit card, whether you want to get a mortgage, the banks have to make their money somehow, and they make their money by charging you interest. That's their profit, essentially. The better your credit score, all other things being equal, the less interest you're going to pay. Many of us get into situations where our credit score, unfortunately, for many reasons, is bad. But there are tools which you can use to kind of build up your credit score gradually to get to something, so you're to a level where you're paying less interest, or indeed not even get rejected for particular offers which you want. A more practical thing might be getting a phone. When you want to go and get a phone, a credit check is run. If you want to get a contract phone, that is. So again, I think, Nate, I think you're right. We will need to do a full session on this at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
One thing I just quickly throw out too that is really important just to think about is if you want to rent an apartment, the landlord is, if they're any good at it, they will check your credit score, because they're on the hook for you. If you're delinquent, it's hard to get rid of tenants, and so they're going to check. And sometimes if you don't have credit, or if your credit's bad, then someone maybe has to co-sign with you on the lease to kind of guarantee that you're going to be good for the money. And that's really what credit scores are, is they're trying to figure out how trustworthy you are and how capable you are of honoring your commitments. So, yeah, so that's what I wanted to make sure we touched on there. So
we have one more question. Go ahead, Ike.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayo, Nate, and Henry, Daniel, for this opportunity. I just want to ask a question. I know it will be in the mind of some of our attendants. Talking about what Nate talked about, the due date when you pay with your credit card, and there's always a due date, a time frame. It's normally 2 weeks. My question is this: is it okay to pay all of the money, or pay minimum balance and keep the rest? Maybe with that, you can build your credit score. Because I've come across some people that have this argument of paying off all your money within the time frame, in a nutshell, not paying the interest.